I'm just getting sick and tired of Albo talking, and everything he says sounds so genuine and righteous.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't build wall. I just own halfway to seawall.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words.
Hey Roger, how you going?
Hey Andy, I'm okay. I just came back from Byron Bay, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, very fancy. Did you see Thor?
I personally think there should be like a clock tower in Byron, and it just kind of tells you whether Zac Efron and the Hemsworth are actually in Byron, so people can stop looking for them. Because actually there's quite a lot of people that look like that, have that same look, that just wander around the beach. So no, we didn't see them. But yeah, it was a great time.
So I was in Byron Bay in November last year, and I must admit the curiosity factor in me was like, I want to see his house, right? Because Thor's got this, like, Chris Hemsworth has this monstrosity of a house that I'm not sure if he even lives there anymore. But anyway,
I think he sold it. It's definitely like a compound.
it's fucking huge. Like, it's like I don't know. It's got, like, you know, the villain from James Bond kind of esque style about it. But anyway, and I thought I had like a mental model of where I thought it actually was located. And then I was in that area, like, oh no, it's nowhere near here. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Google like satellite to figure out where it is. And I'm sure I know where it is. And I still haven't been able to find it. So maybe it is.
You know, the funny thing is, and I wonder sometimes, do they have these like ultra high net worth people that actually pay Google Earth to censor their properties? Because I think that kind of thing would happen, right? Like if you really valued your privacy and you're a billionaire, I'm sure you could make something happen, right? And anyway, this time I actually brought my drone, right? So I brought my drone to Byron.
That would have been good to find Thor's house.
It was great, right? And so I thought, because actually the range is so incredible, and we stayed at this incredible Airbnb property. It had like 7 bedrooms. It was in there with two other families, my sister and my parents and things. And I could fly the drone. I could get it up. And once you get the drone up like 100 or so meters, you can see everything. And you can travel pretty much. We could travel from the surrounding suburbs all the way to the beach and everything, all from the comfort of your home. It was truly amazing what these little drones can do. I can only, think about these military drones and what they're capable of.
You sound like you're on your way to becoming one of those auditors that we spoke about.
I think I need to have less shame. That I still have too much like guilt and shame, because I know I was at the beach and I really wanted to, take the drone off, but it attracts a crowd, and I just didn't have it in me to cause that much of a scene. And I could see like my family and my partner inching away from me because they don't want to be embarrassed. But the good thing about these little drones is you can launch them from a safe, more secluded area and then fly them into the main part of the beach. So yeah, I got some beach footage and things. It's incredible. I really had fun, and Byron's a great place to actually fly these things.
All right. Well, listener question, shall we?
Let's go.
All right. So this is the next in our series of listener questions, where we take something submitted to us, and it's good. We seem to be getting like a few more in now that we've been doing this, so there's a little bit of incentive now that we may get to it. So if you're listening and you want to put something in, you know where to find us on our show notes. So here we go. And I actually haven't read this. I'm reading this live, so I hope it's not too offensive, and apologies in advance. I've been a loyal listener for a while now, but I must say I was quite taken aback by your recent discussions on food culture, especially your take on pizza. As a proud member of the boomer generation, I feel compelled to set the record straight. We boomers have a rich appreciation for food, one that has been cultivated over decades of culinary exploration and enjoyment. Specifically, I'd like to defend our love for a thick-based pizza loaded with cheese. Already we're not sold. There's something deeply satisfying and comforting about biting into a generous, cheesy slice that seems to have been overlooked in your conversations. This isn't just about nostalgia, it's about recognizing the merits of hearty, fulfilling meals that have brought families together for generations. Could you perhaps delve a little deeper into the diverse tastes and preferences across different generations, acknowledging that each has its own culinary gems to offer? I believe your listeners, from boomers like myself to millennials and beyond, would appreciate a more inclusive perspective on what makes food great, including the humble cheese-laden pizza. Sincerely, a disappointed boomer listener.
I was just laughing at the thick base, right? Like, and hats off to you, listener, that you're willing to defend your tastes, because I really like that. But where we grew up, there was this pizza place, and I'll name it. It was called Belmonte's, and it was a local superstar, and they specialized in exactly the kind of pizza that this listener is talking about. Ridiculously thick base and overloaded with cheese and toppings, like very, very generous. Somewhere in between like a Chicago deep dish, but on a really thick base, right? And it was celebrated. People loved it. I think the boomers loved it. And there's many a birthday party held there, and so I think a lot of people do have a lot of nostalgia for that maximalist, over the top creation of pizza, right? And it's almost like a focaccia thickness and thing going on. I think there's a place for it, but it's definitely not authentic, and it's probably seen as very crude, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts on the old thicky boy?
Well, actually, the pretentious pizza, I don't know what they call a pizza chef. It's a pizziola or something.
Pizzola.
The pretentious pizzolo in me. I think I've probably made between 10 and 20 pizzas, so I'm gonna claim that. It is, since I've been making my own pizza, the one thing I'm kind of, because I've just had so many pizzas that I'm experimenting and trying new things, and I'm kind of, there's just a lot of pizza going on, right?
Yeah.
I don't eat the crusts. I just have the bit, like the crusts that go in the bin now, right? I like to taste it just to see like what the texture and all that is. But like for me, that's the dense part that comes with all the calories and the heaviness and all that. So if I don't eat those dense bits, then I get to have more of the good bits in the middle, right?
Taste but don't swallow.
It's a little bit like that. But if I was just having one pizza and I wasn't in this mode, I probably would eat the whole thing. Just like I'd enjoy it, right? But I see this. The reason it's related to this is because a thick base, it's just so heavy. Like it's. I mean, pizza's heavy enough as it is. Like, do you really need to have half a loaf of bread with it? Like,
it's so true, right? Like, this heavy brick of a pizza and the base will fill you up. And I think that, like, even to a lesser extent, pizza or Domino's pizza has that same feeling, right? Like, if you get the traditional base, it's kind of made to fill up kids and family and to like stretch the meal so it actually is a filling meal, right? For what essentially is not much food cost. So it's like that kind of peasant mentality. So, I get it. And like, I think the best thing I can say is that, if you like what you like and you've tried the rest, right, then hats off to you. What I see more as a stereotype of boomer culture is perhaps that they get stuck in what they like and they refuse to try the other food with an open mind, right? Like, if all you've ever had is the Belmonte's kasha brick, of a base, overloaded, 3,000 mushrooms just sliced up and thrown on with like a bag of cheese. If you've only ever had that and you haven't had the proper Neapolitan pizza and everything like that, then, I don't want to talk to you. Like, try it first with an open mind and then we can talk. But if you've already tried it and you still love your thick boy, hats off to you. I'm totally okay with that. And I'll actually throw you a bone. I think we do start off harsh with every boomer episode, but we bring it back, right? Because we love boomers. And, we've been raised by boomers and we have a soft spot for them. So we always come back in the end if you can make it through the initial abuse. And one thing that I regret not saying in terms of food culture in that episode was boomers and wine. I think we missed that one because I think that the red wine, especially red wine culture in Australia, I think we have some of the best, and it is pioneered by boomers in my mind and passed on. And it's a really lovely thing in Australia to be introduced. Like when you meet, usually it's a dad, and you're kind of like a boomer dad, and he has just this really love of red wine, like a deep Shiraz and all this kind of Australian Barossa wine and things like that. It's nice, like, and I think that is an example of them showing a real connoisseur's appreciation to part of food culture. So I want to call that out for red wine. And I think that they have pioneered that partly because they're the only ones that can afford it. But still, hats off to you.
I just want to also make like acknowledgement of the cheese pizza. And if what this listener is reacting to is that like somehow we expressed any kind of disdain for like a cheese slice or or even like a really cheesy pizza, I don't think that what did come out. I don't think that's necessarily where we were coming from. I know myself, like I'm a big fan of like a good slice of cheese pizza. Like for me, that's classic. Like whether we're talking like a margarita with, or we're talking about New York slice style, or even just like fuck the mozzarella. Let's just get like some grated like cheddar cheese or something, and like I love that stuff. Like so, don't worry.
You're being way too generous. It is not the simple cheese pizza where he's talking about these thick boys. He's talking about the super, super, super supreme, where there's half a bag of chopped mushrooms and onions and capsicum on it. Come on. He's not talking about a cheese pizza here.
Do you know, I'm going to apologize in advance to my dad. We recorded this episode on Boomer Food, and I was like, I was racking my brain. I was like, my parents are going to be so offended by this, like how to like thread the needle. And I was like, in like a mixed mind on it. So I just thought, I'm just going to like tell my parents that like I've done this episode. So
get out in front of it.
But yeah, but actually the reason I brought it up, and it was totally, there was nothing to give my dad like an inkling to bring this up, but literally like a week after we recorded it, he said, "Oh yeah, I want to make some pizzas on the Weber," and I just remember when we went to Italy that time, and they had the worst pizzas ever. Oh, no. and I remember, oh my god, so, and that's when I said, we just recorded an episode about Boomer Food. So
the worst pizzas ever in Italy. Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Enough said. All right. So tax cuts.
Stage 3. We're joining the narrative. We're going straight to the third book of Lord of the Rings, and stage 3 now. Getting a lot of airplay at the moment. And rightly so, and as it's kind of in the intersection of the narrative around inflation, but also cost of living crisis. So it's definitely taking off. And one thing that I have started to realize talking to people or overhearing people talk about or digest the stage 3 tax cuts is that a lot of people don't understand the very basics of taxation. It's quite surprising, actually. And, I actually think that some people, and especially younger people, don't understand this notion of like progressive tax. I've had at least probably in the last couple of weeks, I've had at least 2 conversations with people where I slowly realized through the course of the conversation that they thought once you moved into the next tax bracket, that tax rate will be applied to like every dollar they earn up until that point, rather than just like what was above that bracket. And I was like, what? It took me a while to realize, like, it doesn't make sense to earn over this because then you're actually going to lose money. I'm like, yeah, but like nominally you lose. And so no, you like, why would I want to get that promotion when in fact I'll be poorer than I am now? I'm like, what's going on here? So I think actually there's a little bit of a learning curve, and I don't blame them really. Taxation is so boring, but yeah, I don't know. You are the you've got a background in all this stuff. Do you want to have a stab at explaining the general notion of it?
Well, let's give a bit of context for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about. So there was a package of tax cuts which are legislated currently, where people of a certain income would receive, a tax cut by way of a lower rate of tax. But because we've got a progressive tax system, it applied predominantly at the higher income levels of the tax schedule. So, but this was part of, as you said, stage 3. So this was part of a broader tax package, where stage 1 was for low, like they prioritized low income earners first. Stage 2 was for sort of low middle income earners, and so stages 1 and 2 have been delivered. So everyone has got their tax cut notionally, except for higher income earners. And well, higher income earners have got a tax cut because they also, as you say, they also pay tax at those lower rates as well. But in terms of like the more significant tax cut as a percentage of their income, that was going to come with this stage 3, right?
Yeah.
Which would deliver most higher income households their tax cut, so to speak. And there's a few reasons why you would want to do that, even though it sounds a little bit, oh, where's the justice in all of that? Giving high income earners, extra money or whatever. Well, one, there's like an incentive issue. So, what's the incentive to work, those, or to even aspire to the, exactly what you were talking about with your colleague who didn't even know that, like tax does, it's a disincentive, right? So if you're paying $1 in every $2 of your income to the government, then you're less likely to do the extra things that you've got to do to earn more money. So that's a rationale to do it. Australia has quite high marginal rates of tax at that upper end. So, we are, for example, compared to like Canada, the UK, the US, we've got New Zealand even, we've got much higher rates of tax at that higher marginal, the higher income level. So, so to reduce sort of disincentive effects, that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
That you cut that, and that's legislated. But what the government now has announced is that what it's going to do instead is, rather than give higher income earners this tax cut, what they're instead going to do is they're going to retarget the package to give more lower income earners, or at least middle income earners, more of the slice of the pie, right? So whatever money that they were going to spend on higher income earners, they're now going to shift those dollars and reallocate it to give a tax cut to lower income earners, right? And so we have all these weird dynamics, right? Because you have all these higher income earners that like, hey, this is not fair. Like you're like taking money from me. Like you said, at the election, you said you were going to honor the tax cuts, and now you're taking it away from us. Like, how are we ever going to trust you again? And like, this isn't good. But then you've got, then on the other hand, this whole dynamic of like the rest of Australia going, and we should care why. So
Crimea River.
Yeah. So it's like, So anyway, that's where we're at, and I'm not sure when this episode will be released, but this is like the current, this is the current sort of story occupying our headspace at the moment.
It's an interesting dynamic politically, right? And I think that our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has kind of made this brand about someone who follows through on promises, right? Like he strongly believes that, or has publicly said that, the reason that people don't trust politicians is because they don't do what they say they're going to do, right? And that was the main argument behind pushing forward with the Indigenous voice referendum, even though there were very, very strong signs that it would fail, right? Because it was his promise that I said I was going to do that. I took it to the election, and that's what I'm going to do. I've got that mandate. He supported this stage 3 tax cuts. And so now effectively this is a form of breaking that promise. But like you said, the spin on this, or the narrative really, is that conditions have changed. That was a long time ago. That was in 2018. under a different government, different situation, and who can really poke holes in redistributing income to those that are struggling rather than those that are earning over $200,000, on that higher end. So I think it's a really interesting piece, right? Because it's going to be impossible to unwind, but at the same time, it's now there's a target on the back around, can we trust them? And there's a fair point that I can actually see from both ways, right? Like I definitely see this idea of like, they have waited for stage 3. High earners have waited patiently for their turn, only to find out that it's been pretty much chopped in half. I think it's like a pretty much a 50% reduction for the high end of town. So it's a tough place to be in, and I'm really interested to see how people react to this. Right, like I know how the opposition's going to react, of course, but I wonder at large, does money make everything right? Is everyone just going to be greased enough? And the second part that I really would like to come discuss with you is this inflation thing. For a while, like in the lead up to it, it was very much, we should hold off on any kind of tax cut because of inflation. But now, not only we've proceeded, we've given it to lower to middle income earners, and aren't they more willing to spend it because they need to, therefore stimulating the economy?
In terms of the tax cuts themselves, like money, like does it heal all wounds? Well, I think the dynamics of this, like if you take 100 people or 100 taxpayers in a room, most of those are going to feel better off as a result, like by count, right? By number of people, more are going to feel better off as a result of this change. But at the same time, even though more will feel better off, not necessarily enough to like make them suddenly become like an Anthony Albanese like fanboy, right? Because they might only be $20 a week better off, which is usually, it's the famous like milkshake and a hamburger kind of tax cut, right? It's not enough to win anyone over for anything, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge is that the people who've been denied, like, I mean, for better or worse, they might earn more than $200,000 a year, or, I guess it's like anyone who earns over around $150,000 is worse off. So those taxpayers earning over $150,000, even though there's fewer of them and, people generally aren't sympathetic to that cohort, but nonetheless, these are people who are going to be like, well, you know what? Like, you've taken money from my pocket in this cost of living crisis, and I cannot stand this government. Like, I am going to punish this government at the next election. So even though you're giving money to one group of people, they're going to be like, they're going to just stick to their priors, right? They're going to be like, oh, well, I'm going to vote this way no matter, like this tax cut's they're not going to buy any votes, right? But I think they will lose votes. So there's this weird dynamic, and then there's the whole trust thing, as well.
I think the trust thing is the biggest thing for me, right? Like, even if you are someone who is benefiting from these tax cuts, right? It's a gimme, right? Like, you didn't expect that. You are now. Surely, even you can step back and intellectually see the injustice that, it's not the injustice of redistributing this income in a time of hardship, like a cost of living crisis. It's the injustice of tricking people or voters, right? Like, if they were upfront and they said, we are actually, if we have the chance, we will absolutely redistribute the tax cuts down to lower middle income earners because we're inclined that way, we are a Labour government, then perhaps you would not have got the same voting outcome when you took it into the election. And I think that most people can understand that that is a serious issue, right? Like, that actually you can't go into election saying that you're going to literally give people high earners money and then they vote for you, or perhaps not, perhaps they did, and then change it later. It compromises the whole structure of it. And this is exactly what Albanese is talking about, why people do not trust political leaders. And I think that is actually a problem.
I think this is something worth touching on, is that what do you expect a Labor government to do? Like, of course, it's going to stick up for the little guy, like the lower middle income earner. Like, why would you think a Labor government's going to stick up for a higher income, earning households? But the thing is, at the election, even though we got a Labor government, the electorate didn't really vote for a Labor government. They voted for a party that was not the coalition led by Scott Morrison, that they thought would, broadly operate, in a sort of not do crazy shit, right? That was the central value proposition of like Anthony Albanese, was that we're not going to do any crazy stuff, right? Because 3 years earlier, you had Bill Shorten, who lost that election against Morrison because he was promising all these changes to negative gearing and all these other things. And, the electorate just said, look, we don't want that. It's too risky, right? And so Anthony Albanese went with pretty much a relatively small target strategy of like, we're just not going to do much at all, and we'll just be the adults in charge. And like that was a pretty compelling message, to be honest, because it was a bit of a rabble by the end of it. But since they've been in power, they've done a few things, this tax cut thing's another, but there's other things they've been doing in the industrial relations space and some other policy decisions they've made, where there's now this like narrative of like, this is a Labor government. This is like the union run Labor government.
We've got a Trojan horse on our hands.
Yeah. And that's not what the community voted in. Like, that's certainly what like a lot of Labor voters voted that in, but like the marginal voters, on the undecided voters in the middle weren't kind of wanted just that steady pair of hands. And it's the classic, Australians, even though we're a lot more egalitarian than say like in America, where I think, we do, the fair go and all that stuff. But the other thing, so that part of it's kind of very much would resonate. But the other part that Australians, I think, value is reward for effort, and the notion of, if you work hard and you deserve what you earn. And we're not talking about like, rich kids who go to elite private schools that get, kind of gifted their first job from their dad or whatever, and they're suddenly earning all this extra money because they don't deserve it. We're talking about people who work maybe 60-hour weeks. They might have worked very hard. They might have propelled themselves into, they've climbed the ladder or whatever, and they've worked very hard to do that. So whether you are at the point where you've reached that point and you've made it, and you are on these higher income points in the progressive tax structure, or you feel like you're on your way to that, even if you're not there yet, you value this sense of, no, I work hard and I have earned what I've got. And that's part of the sense of the Australian ethos as well, I think, which is that if people work hard, they deserve it. But that's not to be confused with the sense that like people who are just lucky deserve money for no reason. Like that's different. There's people who work hard who do it, who deserve the money that they earn.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, everyone has a different attitude towards this, and leaving Australia alone for a second, there's been plenty of times where, say, a billionaire figure in the States like Elon Musk has been criticized for, his contribution or whatever. And, he'll come up with lines saying, 2023, I'm going to pay the most tax that any individual has ever paid before. And it's equivalent to, some shocking stat of like, 85% of population or something like this. And, when you sit back and think about it, it's pretty shocking that like the burden is on that one person, right, to pay that much tax. It does not cap out. It doesn't cap out. It just keeps on going, right? And it can get to some pretty shocking numbers. I think that Australia, correct me if I'm wrong, also has a very high reliance on personal income in terms of taxation revenue, right, compared to other countries.
Yeah, we do. And this is the bracket creep story, right? So one of the reasons you need to reduce personal income tax rates is because with inflation, those rates that were fine 10 years ago aren't fine now, right? And the only rates that haven't changed in 10 years or however long are these higher, well, there've probably been changes at the margins or whatever, but we have high marginal rates, and when they apply at actually as inflation goes up and as incomes go up, they apply at lower and lower levels, and then income tax increases, the government's tax take. But to your Elon Musk example, like if you've got like claim to be the richest person on the planet, or thereabouts, I think I think that there's no limit to the amount of tax you pay. That instead of being out of pocket, I don't know in a year how much Elon Musk would make in terms of income, but let's just say, just for argument's sake, rather than pocketing $20 billion, the government takes 10 billion and you keep 10 billion. Well, I think, the whole of society can probably say, well, no one can work hard enough to deserve 10 billion. But so that's fine. That's fair. That's your compact with one another as society. But when you are talking about, let's say, $200,000 or $150,000, and I'll definitely sound out of touch here, but like, when people are earning like $150,000, there's this assumption that they must be rich, right? That they must be like, oh, they must be wealthy, and they wouldn't have a money care in the world. So what do they need a tax cut for? But that's just not true. Like someone on $150,000, let's talk this through. So they might be supporting a whole family on that. So that $150,000, they might be, I mean, they may not be, but they might be a single income earner. If they are on $150,000, chances are they live in like a key economic center like Sydney or Melbourne, and they are paying through the roof to live in Sydney or Melbourne, because the only jobs that pay that much tend to be in places like Sydney and Melbourne, and housing markets in those locations are crazy. So they might be paying $1,000 a week in rent, for example, or more, or whatever mortgage they've got. They might the minimum cost. I mean, in Sydney, the cost of a house in Sydney, really under, I don't know, like 1.5 million. Is there really anything going for under a 1.5 mil in Sydney? And so when you're talking about $150,000, that won't even get your mortgage to buy a house at the median house price in Sydney. So these are not necessarily high income earners. So they might be high income earners to people living in, let's say, regional Australia or whatever, but they're not necessarily swimming with cash, especially with all the interest rate increases. And if they've signed a mortgage in the last sort of 3-4 years, they're going to be things are going to be pretty tight.
I always get into trouble when you talk about annual incomes, and I think that's the really hard thing. And I know for a fact, and I've seen it in multiple cases on social media and comments around things around, as soon as someone tries to put a dollar figure and break it down like you just did, you get all sorts of people come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, I earn like $30,000 a year. What is this? And they'll pull out some ridiculously low number. I don't know what's going on there. And sometimes this is probably just social media being social media, right? But this idea that once you've made six figures, you have no right to complain, right? And you're right. It's just not true, right? Like I think that the horrible, horrible state of affairs right now is that you can have two people on six figures and still be struggling to live the Australian dream of owning property in Melbourne or Sydney or any capital city, really. And I think that's like the honest truth, right? And I think this is, we've talked about before, this idea of like, you're trying to do you're doing everything right. You followed the script, you're earning a good wage, but you're not ahead. And in some ways you're still very anxious for your own position. And I think that has to be acknowledged, right? Because when people talk about these tax cuts, right, like 150, 200 combined household income, what are we talking about here? Like, actually, we're talking about middle Australia in a lot of ways, right? And I think that that changes the nature of this conversation around tax cuts, right? Like, we're not talking about giving Gina Reinhardt like an extra ivory back scratcher or two a month, right? We're talking about its impact is a lot of people, the people that you work with every day, that, you know, like, and I think people kind of shy away from that in some ways. Like, I wish people would be more upfront with that actually some of these stage 3 amendments have screwed over a lot more people than the elites.
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah. And I think just in thinking about responsibilities, like, and those low income examples, you know, you think, well, all right, what's the minimum wage in Australia? Well, yeah, if you're on the minimum wage, 6 figures looks pretty good, right? But let's be honest, like, the people on the minimum wage tend to be on it for not very long while they're on transition to the next step of employment, right? So it's something that you go through when you're a junior in your career, when you don't have much experience. Maybe it's not even your career. Maybe it's just a bit of extra pocket money, or you're doing it while you're studying or whatever. And then let's say even then you enter the job market, you actually do have a good job, but it's still not 6 figures yet. But you're junior in your career. You don't have, and you're junior in your life too. You don't have many commitments. Maybe you're on $80,000 a year, which is, you know, a good income. But maybe $80,000 a year sounds like, you know, much less than the kinds of 150,000, almost twice $80,000. So it's like, oh well, you know, $80,000. So yeah, someone like, why should we have, you know, if we're saying $80,000 is good, then $150,000 must be exceptional. But then the person on $80,000 is less likely to have a family, less likely to be supporting multiple children and dependents. They're less, I mean, they might be. I'm not saying there aren't people on $80,000 a year who don't, but they're also less likely to have to commute to or work in. I mean, this has changed with COVID a little bit, I suppose, but, you know, at least traditionally, if you are on $150,000 a year or, you know, 6 figures, you're probably living in Sydney or Melbourne.
Yeah.
You got you not regional New South Wales. House prices are through the roof. So there's just different costs and different commitments. And I just think just take one step back. This isn't about, like, just to be clear, I don't think this conversation where, like, we're not having like some sort of poverty porn conversation where it's like, oh, high income earners are doing it the worst and the toughest, and, you know, we should all feel sorry for them. Of course, like, you should count yourself very lucky if you're even in this situation where this even affects you in a negative way, let alone a positive way. But at the same time, this is just to acknowledge that, like, this whole narrative of it being like the public reaction to it, I think just to call out that it's not quite, or it might be in some cases, but it's not universally the slam dunk that I think it gets made out to be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there will be consequences for it. There is something naturally that happens, you know, like that old trope about, you know, what do they say? If you're not liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no mind, right? I think there is, like, I actually see a bit from our generation, like, if I'm totally honest, that start off quite, you know, these liberal values, and as they get older and older, they start to realize that even though their heart might be there, they start to acknowledge that they would be better off voting for the coalition policies and a more conservative policy. And I think that it's these kind of little things where the Labour Party will lose people, right? They're already on the fence of, like, I know in my heart that I should be voting Liberal coalition because that's who I am. Like, I'm the kind of base economically, but I don't like some of the social stuff. There's this kind of stuff that swings those people. And that naturally happens as people become more affluent. As they build, like you said, they build their careers, and all of a sudden they have all these financial stresses. And I think that, you know, have to be strategic about that, about the generation coming up as well.
Yeah, well, but like, one of the things we saw at the last election was the emergence of the till cohort, right, of voters, and they were targeting exactly
Yeah.
the sentiments you talk about, where I'm not Labor because Labor's all about, unions and all that shit, and that's not me. I just want to get on with my life and work and earn my money and hopefully not get taxed too much. But I'm on all social progressive issues. Coalition's a bit too right wing for me. And that's what the Teals were all about, right? They were about environmentally conscious. In some ways, they were focused on the kinds of issues that only high income earners can care about. You can only engage in these sorts of topics once you've climbed the Maslow's ladder sort of thing. It'll be interesting to see how this impacts them, because they're cornered here. They're absolutely snookered, because it's what do we do? Do we support high income earners? But then what kind of image does that give off? And I think a lot of coalition voters that went Teal might just kind of say, all right, well, we had our fun. We've got to come back, because at the end of the day, you're not going to reduce your tax rate by voting Teal, right? Let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to the trust issue, right? I think that in this particular example where Albanese was cornered on the specific topic, quite a lot, will you change, will you support it? Will you change the stage 3? And, he's playing the clip endlessly now where he's like, I cannot make myself more clear. I will not be changing it, And so I think that these kind of things where you've perhaps won votes on the back of things, broken promises, that's significant, right? And I think the parallel between that and standing up to say the voice referendum, in spite of its success, I think this is a pretty bad kind of ledger to hold up to the public, right?
Yeah.
And I think that they're going to be punished. And part of me does hope that people kind of also see it for what it is, right? This idea of having the small target strategy, this idea of not winning off the back of that is it really a win, right? When you're trying to almost minimize your party's ideals to get in as a political strategy, only to kind of Trojan horse your liberal social values later down the track. And then, like you said, turn around and go, oh, what did you expect? No, I don't think that's quite right. I don't think that's quite fair to say that to the public, that just because you did a swing to a Labour vote, it means that you can expect them to give radical redistribution of your money.
Yeah. Well, I think just to, be the middle, so I think we've probably given the more cynical view thus far, but just to give, let's say the other side, right? So what's is this the decision that had to be made, right? So, I mean, you can say, well, we would like not to have killed the kangaroo, but the alternative was we steer the car into the tree, and we didn't want to do that, so we kept driving and killed the kangaroo, sort of thing. Is this just a bad decision that they had to make, right? And notwithstanding all of those things you've just mentioned, and I think you can just imagine, in some ways, you can have some respect for the decision in that, notwithstanding all of those political consequences, they've done what they believe is right. And I don't think it's necessarily politically, one view might be, oh, well, yeah, giving money to people is politically easier, but it's actually quite hard. Taking money away from people is harder than giving money to people, actually.
You're giving money to more people, though.
Yeah, but you're not giving enough. I mean, you can give money to people, but they're not going to thank you for it. But as soon as you take money away from people, that's when they'll never let it down. So there's a certain kind of admiration you can have for the decision, in that they've genuinely thought that this is the right thing to do. And it probably on some grounds is the right thing to do. I mean, if we do have cost of living crisis, as everyone keeps saying, and you can give some tax relief to those who need it more, and probably on balance, yes, lower income earners do need it more. So if we do want to kind of play that game, then there's no world where you're going to be able to spin that higher income earners need the money more than lower income earners. I mean, that's not going to work. So then it's purely like a, well, you honor your promise sort of thing, right? And I kind of think that we should give politicians some ground to lead and to do it not bound by, every commitment they made and honoring it in this really mindless kind of way. Like we don't want to elect politicians just to follow a set of predetermined rules and procedures. Like we want them to actually think on the job. So I kind of accept that, but maybe, and this is where I would probably agree with you on the trust thing, is that these issues around this tax package, they have been understood and known for some time. This isn't like this happened this last 3 months. Like this is since before the election, these were legislated with Labor agreeing to them. Inflation's been high for some years. This isn't cost of living is a perennial issue. This isn't a new emergency crisis response. So they should have been upfront, and they weren't. So that's.
I mean, you can't even finish the complementary line of argument without crumbling it down at the end, though, Andy. Like this goes to the heart of exactly what I was talking about. That you've got Liberal, you Labor, you've got those values. You didn't support stage 3 to begin with. You kind of went along with it, but you didn't want to do it. But you still got all the benefits of saying that you would support it, only to change it now when you like you said, you knew about those other issues propping it up, right? And there were obviously other options and things that they could do. And to be honest, like I'm having this vision of House of Cards and Kevin Spacey, and I'm talking about, I parlayed the political capital I had just the right time. And I'm just thinking of like every time I'm just getting sick and tired of Albo talking, and everything he says sounds so genuine and righteous. Like it doesn't matter what he does, he just makes it sound like he is doing honest to God, best job, best thing for the people, and he's doing the right thing. Right? Like, and it's just all bullshit. Like I think that it sounded good with the referendum. It sounded good and it sounds good now. Like I listened to his talk about why he's taken a tough call to make changes and he'll take responsibility and accountability for that. And you listen to this guy talk and you're like, my God, this is it's not even spin. It just sounds true. It sounds like he's the one sacrificing. He's the one, he's the one giving up the tax cut and that he has to take one for the team to do this. But really, for all the reasons that I spoke about, I think it's a little bit tougher to buy now, right? Like it's kind of like fool me once. I think that he's not coming off a win to get this over the line, right? And like you said, this is not the slam dunk that you think it is, right? This is not a return to making up for things around social issues or whatever. I just don't think he has the right capital to push this one through. Maybe that's the wrong way of putting it because it is going through. It's just more my take on it. I also think it's like somewhat manipulative because it's impossible, like you said, to really sit there academically and justify redistributing money to those who need it more than high income earners. It's like a trapped outcome. Like it puts everyone in a position where now they feel there's something that was owed to them. Now they're not getting it, and they can't complain because people need it more than them. But you can extend that thinking to every part of society. Like you
may as well just have the progressive tax system may as well just be 0 and 100, right? So if you earn less than $200,000 a year, you pay no tax, and if you earn more than $200,000, you're destitute, right?
That's what I mean. You can take that argument and just run wild with it. There are no easy answers, and I'm not saying this is me expressing a mood and a kind of a sequence of events from this particular government. And I'm not necessarily have any personal gain in this, right? Like I don't think our listeners should take that, right? Like everyone has to look at their own situation, but it is something that I think that they're hoping will just be seen as like they've done the right thing and they've done the righteous thing.
So the other thing is like, at the election at that time, and notwithstanding any internal conversations that they had, it would have been a true statement that we don't have any plans to change the tax cuts, right? It would have been an absolutely true statement. There would have been no decisions made to do that, but there would have been in the back of their minds, oh, we'd love to change these tax cuts. Like, we don't have any concrete plan, but like if the circumstances are right and we can get away with it, we'll utterly do it. It's a bit like work choices. It's like Howard gets control of the Senate. It's like, oh, I can implement work choices. Giddy up. And it's like, if the circumstances are there, politicians will do the things that they actually want to do if they think they will get away with it. And that's what's happened here. So the game wasn't on until it was on. And it was on because they thought that they could spin it, or they'd got whatever advice that they needed. Like, there would have been some policy advice saying, or economic modeling saying, this will increase, economic participation, and will increase productivity, and it will give these economic benefits more so than cutting the high rates. And there'll be some justification for it. Then they're banking on, well, we're giving more Australians a tax cut than we're, kind of reducing, or at least giving less than we would have otherwise given a tax cut too. So just the sheer number of people we're going to be making better off is going to countervail like people we're making worse off. But yeah, it's like all those, and that's true, but like, I just think these are the kinds of decisions that you might say that the bold decisions make a government, but I think this one feels like a weak, something of a weak decision, because it shows their weakness, that they weren't up front, that they weren't leading. But anyway, I don't know. We'll see how we go.
And I want to end this particular episode by saying, be forgiven for thinking that I'm some kind of conservative. But I voted Labour at the last election, and
but only because you thought you were getting a tax cut.
And I do, and I came into the cycle with a lot of capital for Albert, as a character and as the head of the party. So I've started from a very high base. Unfortunately, it's fallen progressive, like our taxes.
All right. Well,
I'll shout you about Monty's Pizza with my tax cut.
I can't afford penalties anymore. Maybe Domino's. Do they still have that $2.99 special that keeps talking about?
The guy in the billboard, yeah.
All right. Over and out.